Yeah, I've done it 15 years. Back in 2007, I got in the game. This is obviously during the meltdown. And so uh, I myself lost my home to foreclosure. I was sleeping on my friend's couch. I had a repo man take my car. So that was a fun time. And so that led me to really be driven to be successful in the investment space. I was a realtor at the time and I hated being a realtor. And so 15 years later, I've done nearly 2,200 deals.
Wow.
I'm doing it all across the country. I'm buying and holding, I'm wholesaling, I'm flipping, I'm doing the whole thing virtual. And my big push over the next, I don't know, however long it takes, let's call it a decade, is to get to 2,000 rentals, 2,000 doors. Um, could be quicker than that. Could be in
Mhm.
the next 2 to 5 years. I just don't know. But that'll be my big push. I'll continue to do, what I call active income, wholesaling and flipping. It'll always be a part of my business. Um, but while doing that, I'm going to make a real big push for 2,000 doors. And so excited for what the economy is bringing to us right now. It has been challenging, obviously, in the last 4 months. I've educated and I'm currently coaching hundreds of thousands or hundreds of people and tens of thousands over the last 9 years. So interestingly enough, the last, year or so, I've really tempered down my rehabbing, right? And I focused a lot more on wholesaling because I knew these days were coming
Mhm.
and I'm grateful for it. I probably made less money in the last year, year and a half because I was a little bit more cautious, but that cautiousness has me in a really good spot right now, where I know there's a lot of people in pain as fix and flippers. So excited for this opportunity, excited to be a leading uh, influencer, if you will, in our space of real estate investing and continuing to, give everyone the systems, tools, strategies that can work in any economy.
That's super exciting, man. And definitely thanks for sharing that personal story, how you got started. I definitely want to dive a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned some, exciting times that we're in right now from a market perspective. I definitely want to get some of your insights in terms of personally. You mentioned wholesaling and what are you investing in and what are you avoiding, stuff like that. That's interesting to me. I try to pay a lot of attention to different indicators, different studies, and everything that goes on in our industry. So that's super, definitely pumped about this conversation. Before we get going on that, maybe share a little bit of a background story on how you got started in training others. What's the motivation behind this? I understand you do a lot of coaching, you do a lot of training events on real estate investing, flipping, wholesaling, all of that stuff. Essentially, what sounds like what you personally are doing, and you're trying to teach others. What's the drive behind this? Maybe speak a little bit more from that perspective.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, 2014, I started my podcast. And from that is what really spawned the coaching, right? Because people would hit me up from the podcast, The Science of Flipping. So that's the shirt, The Science of Flipping, right? Um,
Oh, TSOF. That's what it stood for. I was wondering.
The Science of Flipping. Yeah.
Love it.
And so, and I had a guy kind of create a cool looking look to it. But
Mhm.
it's that spawned this in this. When I say this is a very robust coaching program, I really want to make sure people understand, do not be a one-trick pony in the real estate space. Do not be a one-trick pony in the marketing. Do not be a one-trick pony on how you acquire. Do not be a one-trick pony on how you exit. There are diversity in all three of those sectors of our business. And so I'm really pushing what I call being a dynamic investor. There's a lot of wholesale coaches and, people out there, which many of them are my friends. So there's no knock on them at all. But I have just done so many deals and I've done them in such a diverse way that I really impress upon people being diverse in the real estate sector, to the point of, you mentioned a fund, right? Even if you just passively want to invest into a fund and collect real passive, and that's real passive income relative to a rental, which,
Mhm.
if you have any rentals, it is not necessarily truly passive. But investing to a fund is truly passive. You make the investment, you collect checks every quarter or month or however, yearly, however they pay out. I say all that to say, the reason why I even started the podcast is I wanted a platform to share kind of the success I had going into 2014. My good friend Sean Terry was like, dude, start a podcast. I was like, perfect idea. And so, but why I built a business out of it is because it actually stemmed from my childhood. I actually, as a child, thought I was going to be a teacher. That was like, hey, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I'm like, a teacher, right? Um, and then you get a little older and old enough to know how much they make in income.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I'm going to pass on being a teacher. And then I told my grandmother one day, I was like, well, then maybe I'm going to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. She was very excited. My grandmother was a teacher and a principal my whole life, right? And so she was the leading drive of why I wanted to be in the education space. Because you typically follow your parents to some extent, and my grandma was like a mother to me. So then I tell her that, and she says, "Awesome." And then I'm old enough to figure out how much schooling they have to go to.
Mhm.
And then I said, "Oh, probably gonna pass on those as well." So I've been an athlete my whole life. I started coaching, kids, as I got into adulthood, etc. And so I've always had this passion and fulfillment that comes from giving to others, teaching others, encouraging others, coaching others. And it was a natural fit for me. And the thing about that is people will always say this, Justin, you're so successful in real estate. Why do you coach? Why don't you just do more real estate? Right? Because people firmly believe, because of the saying's been around forever, people that can't do teach, right? Which is fucking bullshit. I still do 10 to 20 deals every single month nationally. I'm actively buying rentals. That saying may have been something at one point, but it is definitely not true for me.
Mhm.
And so what I tell people all the time is real estate will always be a part of my life, and I will never retire from real estate. Coaching fills a passion real estate can't. Now I've made it into a business transparently. It is a business. The investment to be in my coaching is not small, but it fulfills me in a way that I can't replace in that sense. Real estate is fun. It's transactional to some extent, especially wholesaling. Can make you a lot of money, which is really
Mhm.
fun. Uh, but you don't get the connective tissue to that. You don't get to see people. I had a student join me literally December 31st, last day of the year.
Mhm.
Perfect tax write-off, might I mention. But he's already collected his first check. He
Nice.
collected his first check last week on Monday. And to me, there's nothing more empowering than watching someone who's like, I need to change my life. They get into coaching and they literally just financially change their life. So that's a little long in the story, but that's why I do this, man. And it is fun.
Mhm. No, that makes perfect sense. At the end of the day, it's also for you, it seems like an opportunity to, to expand on your community, expand on your network. And I would imagine that good amount of deal flow also comes through those opportunities as well as you coaching, mentoring somebody, and there's an opportunity to maybe join the deal. I've been part of that many times on both on the real
Yeah.
estate side and on the venture capital side. It makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. You've mentioned wholesaling, especially in the current markets, which make a lot of sense to me, especially from the flipping standpoint with the way market has shifted. Even in my own circles, the folks that have been very active on the flipping side kind of just been maybe stuck a little bit more in the sense that, look, I was banking on, here's my math on just offloading this particular property at these particular numbers, but now the rates and everything have changed, so now I got to make adjustments. And then on the wholesaling side, it's a more of a, seems like a relationship game where you have to have these solid relationships between the sellers and the buyers and the investors, and you're that master broker in between trying to put that package, that deal together. Talk a little bit further about the value of a relationship, the value of that, that master connector when it comes to wholesaling. And from your standpoint, what really separates these successful wholesalers from those that are still trying to break that barrier? Because at the end of the day, you have to adjust to the markets, like you said. It's a cyclical, industry, and you have to not be that one trick pony, as you mentioned, that if you, in order to be successful as a real estate investor.
Network is the number one pillar that I will tell everyone to focus on
Mhm.
always. And even more so in 2023 as we're recording this episode. So if you're listening to this in 2026, it's still the number one pillar.
Right.
But even more importantly, as a moment in time, I'll tell you to level your game up, to get into a place that you've never been, to get to levels that you have not achieved. it is firmly your network. And I'll say that by saying, even reaching out in our space of real estate investing, reaching out to other investors and doing a deal with them, reaching out to agents and doing a deal that maybe is a listing that they can't move and providing value to them, which will bring you more deals in the future, right? Finding buyers who are having a hard time finding a deal that fits their buy bucket if you're a wholesaler, right? Reaching out to people. You have a fund, I have a fund. Reaching out to people and showing them how they can actually make money passively and how they have certain tax write-offs that come from that. All those things are really important for your network, right? So if you're like, oh, Justin, I don't know how to get into the fix and flip game, I don't have any money. Well, your network does. Your network has money. And most people, like myself, didn't come from money. Me and my wife were just talking about this. Like, I never went without in that sense. Like, I don't have that woe is me. We lived in a car for 2 months. I didn't have that story.
Mhm.
I had my own story. But we didn't ever have money, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
so I didn't come from a place that had money, but I can tell you, I've raised tens of millions of dollars of private money because I understood the power of my network. And it's simple as this. Here's the simple of raising money for all those that are interested. Ask.
Mhm.
Just ask, right? If you just say, hey, are you interested in either lending money or partnering on a deal or whatever? If so, great, let's have a conversation. That's it. I literally teach my students this. For all of you real estate investors out there that are potentially looking at raising money, do this one thing. Here's your golden takeaway right now. We're 10 minutes into this episode. Go to Facebook. Oh, I don't like Facebook. I don't care about people's cats. Go to Facebook and put this one post up. I'm looking for capital partners on a couple real estate investing opportunities that I have. If you're interested, DM me. That's the whole post. I'm looking for capital partners on a couple real estate investment opportunities I'm looking at. If
Mhm.
you're interested, DM me. That I literally, my students do that. I force them to do that. They raise hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars with one post. It freaks them out. They actually get freaked out by it. Like, now what do I do? Oh my God, they have $250,000 sitting in there, right? And they're like, that actually worked.
Mhm.
It just works. And so I say all that to say, to answer your question, your network, the people you surround yourself with, it is absolutely everything. The key is understanding how to provide value to them, because when you do that, value will come back to you. You don't need to do it in a way that you're expecting value to come back, right? But it will come back just through I firmly believe, through the universe. Like, if you just keep giving, it all comes back to you energetically.
Right, that makes perfect sense. And the power of the ask. I recently hosted a very successful real estate broker on the podcast as well, and he spoke to something similar to that extent. Is every day when he wakes up, his number one priority or number one goal for his business is to ask and talk to as many people as possible. Doesn't matter if it's your own network or it's not. Just the power of asking, the power of talking, and just striking that conversation, it's a powerful thing. And at the end of the day, it seems so simple yet oftentimes overlooked. Like you mentioned, make a simple post on a Facebook and you'd be shocked at what type of responses you would get. So that's that goes a long way. So I definitely appreciate sharing that particular example. um, from a perspective of where we at in the market and in the industry right now, it's a lot of different insights, a lot of different opinions. It's all over the place. Inflation this, recession that, all of that. What's your personal take on that? How do you personally operate when there's just so much noise, so much different information overload? Everyone seems to be an
Mhm.
expert, everyone seems to have that crystal ball, everyone seems to be preaching what they should be doing. How do you keep yourself kind of segregated from all of that noise and stick to your
Sure.
personal investment thesis and stay disciplined from that standpoint? Just maybe talk to us a little bit more from a personal perspective. How do you keep that
Sure.
muscle growing, and not let all of those opinions and decisions and things like that influence how you operate?
Well, number one, kind of going back to answering about the network. So I'm a part of several masterminds. One of them is what I would argue probably has the highest, most successful group of real estate investors in the nation, the boardroom. my friend Kent Clothier and I had this brainchild years ago, and he really took off with it, and it is incredible. There's 250 maybe of incredibly high level successful entrepreneur real estate investors specifically.
Mhm.
And I say that to also bring around, I can go into those groups and take little golden nuggets out of it. I also can go into those groups and see the failures that are coming from it and not make those mistakes, which brings me back to the network. If you're around people, you can make decisions that keep you on the straight and narrow, because you might get this shiny object idea. Oh, let's go do that. But then you go to your mastermind and you see what happened to someone who went and did that. And you say, okay, well, that I'm not going to go do that anymore. Right.
Mhm.
And so being around people that can show you what not to do is just as important as being around people that can show you what to do. And so in terms of my strategy, it's very simple. And I simplified it now in my old age, right? You see, I don't have any hair anymore, right? So I've gone through the challenges, right? I've it up long enough to learn my lesson. So for me, it is make an extreme amount of active income,
Mhm.
wholesaling and flipping. And from that point, have the opportunity to buy as many rentals as possible. That's why you need to be dynamic, because wholesaling and flipping can create a lot of money. But I'm really looking to build the wealth side of this whole thing. Because then at some point, if I truly do, and I don't think I'll ever retire, by the way, but if I did, I have the option to. I don't have to rely on the active income anymore, right? I've built it to a place where if I literally do not want to do anything except for travel the world with my wife, then I'll have that option. And so I think that the biggest mistake, by the way, you guys just heard me say I've done it long enough. I've done it wrong enough, long enough to learn my lessons, right? Um, the money I've lost, and we're talking millions in the 15 years, doesn't even come close to the biggest mistake I've made. And that is not buying rentals soon enough, not buying rentals from day one. So if I can encourage anyone here that's interested in real estate investing, I wouldn't necessarily just say go out and buy a rental. I'm not necessarily saying that either. But I am saying at very minimum, your first year in business, your focus should be to make enough money so you can buy one rental. And by the way, you don't even need to use your money.
Mhm.
That's the key. I literally just bought 3 doors in January with none of my own money, all private money investors, right? And so I made all my money and I got to keep it. Isn't that fun?
Yeah.
Right. So I'd also just say, like, the focus is simple: make a lot of active income, wholesaling and flipping, buy a lot of rentals, not even using my money for the most part.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That's for sure. Definitely resonates on so many levels. It's very inspiring from a perspective of really focusing on that generational wealth, because for me, that's the biggest driver, building something that I can definitely have my kids take over and all of that. And to
Yeah.
echo what you're saying on the kind of the lesson learned through this journey is also for me, selling the properties that I've acquired. The lesson learned is I should have just held on to those for as
Yeah.
many years as possible, because at the end of the day, those are the assets, and just not really focusing on the short-term gain. I'm realizing that every day that real estate is such a long-term game. At the end of the day,
Yep.
if you have that mindset, that's how you win. So that's leads me further to a question of what's what's really the long-term vision for you, for the business that you're building, for the assets that you're acquiring, for the coaching business that you have growing, and the portfolio you've mentioned, I believe 2,000 doors or
Yeah. That's where I'm going. I don't have
2,000.
that
Yeah.
yet, brother. I don't have that yet. Uh,
Yeah. So how did you establish that goal? And essentially, how do you plan this out long term? And what's your vision there from a personal perspective?
to be frank, how I established that goal is I've been hanging around Grant Cardone more. Um, I don't want to say he's a mentor of mine per se, but he's kind of taken me under his wing a little bit. I've spent a lot of time with him towards the end of last year. And he's just always like, Justin, you're just not thinking big enough. You're just not. Um, and so while initially, I was just like, I just want to go out and buy rentals. His point was put a number on it, like go start to achieve something.
Mhm.
So that's where I came up with 2,000, because I just figure, listen, if every door kicks off $200 a month passively, you can pretty easily do the numbers, right? You're making 400 grand a month.
Yep.
So that's a pretty nice income, right? And that's passively. So I was like, okay, that's livable,
Yeah.
right? Um, so that number, by the way, can increase. And what I'd say to that is anyone who has a goal right now, anyone who has, I'm trying to achieve this, it can change. You can always keep pushing that goalpost down the field, right? And so anyone who's like, oh, I want to go get my first deal, or I want to make my first $1 million, or I want to, well, now my goals have started talking about a B. I want to go become a billionaire through real estate. Is doable. Grant has now led the path, right? So it's kind of that 4-minute mark, that 4-minute mile story that we all hear about Roger Bannister, right? No one ever did it. No one ever did it. He goes out and does it, and all of a sudden, like a month later, someone else does it, and then now people are trying to get a 3-minute mile or whatever. But
Yeah.
I say that to say Grant's a very normal dude. The more you spend time with him, he is not like what you see on social media. He's one of us. He's normal. He just thinks bigger. That's it. I mean, that's kind of his superhuman power. And so I would say all that to just simply say, if I hit 2,000 doors, that might turn into 10,000 doors, right?
Right.
I mean, you don't know. So, but think about what I just said. We just started talking about having wealth. Think about the income is kicking off too. When you get to a certain size of wealth building, that alone starts kicking off income, right? Where now you make it, do I really want to be wholesaling and flipping? Or is my $400,000 a month good enough?
Yeah. Yep.
You
Yep.
know,
Do you ever think about at the point when you get there and you've scaled so much so far that it almost, it's going to be a business of its own where you have such a large portfolio and it's, you've mentioned at the beginning, it's very far from being passive, right? And all of us who own rental units, we all know how, how much anxiety also goes into that, where you don't know
for
something that
sure.
would, happen overnight and things like that. How do you prepare for that when you get to that point where you've reached, let's say you get to that to 2,000 doors, and in parallel, I would imagine that you carefully planning out the process of establishing the whole infrastructure to be able to manage that successfully and grow maybe from there. Share some thoughts from that perspective. How do successful investors, when they reach a certain mark, but at the same time not lose that, that I guess that quality of the building something in the process, and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks, where it doesn't become where like, oh my God, now I got these 2,000 properties to manage. It's a headache. All I
Yeah.
think about is just, these renters calling me or my property management company about something breaking. Maybe share some thoughts from that perspective, for more established investors.
Yeah. So listen, I literally just bought one. And you talked about deal flow earlier. I didn't get to mention this, but I just bought a rental from one of my students. He went out. I taught him how to negotiate a subject to deal. He listened to me. He negotiated one, and then he sold it to me, and he made $8,500 just for being one of my students. So the cyclical life of relationships and community, and it's always a win. If you're not a part of a community, be a part of a community. Period. End of story. Right? Have a coach. Have a mastermind. Be a part. So that deal that I'm talking about right now is in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, wow.
And we closed. I actually am training my friend's son in this space. And so I sent him out to Dayton, Ohio, take a look at the house so we can get it all, ready. And there was a leak in the upstairs bathroom that basically flooded the kitchen, which is awesome. And this is exactly what you're talking about, right? Where you're just like, oh my God, everything was fine. We closed on the deal. We go out there 7 days later. This leak has been running, and here we are. So how do you navigate that? How do you handle that? How do you foresee that coming? Here's the reality. You don't foresee those things coming, right? We almost bought a deal literally Friday that I asked one of my students who was in the area, can you go see it really quick? Because I think I'm going to have to replace the roof. That was the measurement of whether we were going to buy or not. He drives by, he texts me, he's like, did you know a tree fell through the roof? I'm like, no, that was not in the pictures. That was not in the pictures. And so those are realities. That happens, right? So how do you mitigate that? To some extent, you can't. That's the answer. To some extent, some of these freak things, some things that are a little bit outside of your control, you navigate them the best you can, right? You navigate the waters the best you can as it happens. So, for example, the rental I have in Dayton, we're doing insurance. We're calling insurance saying, hey, faulty, whatever was happening, you know, let's have the insurance try to rectify it. I didn't buy that other home, right?
Yeah.
Because of the roof falling through. So to some extent you can't. But the other part is I firmly believe in having at least a property manager in place at minimum. And the reason why is because like they can handle 90% of all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Anything extreme is extreme, of course. But you know, people are very short-sighted when it comes to like, yeah, but they're taking 10% of my money. Well, if you're relying on your one rental's income to live, then we have just a different discussion to have with you, right? I mean, that's just the reality is, you know, people are buying rentals for income. I
Mhm.
don't. My model is different, right? I don't need the income, right? In fact, I don't even want it. So even if I think I have 9 properties in Oklahoma, it's spitting out cash every month. I think I have another, I don't know, 6 in Alabama. Anyways, my point being is they're making money.
Mhm.
Um, I don't do anything. I don't take it. I keep it in the account. If something happens, it's there, but also to go buy another one, right?
Yeah.
And to keep that going. So I don't, my model is not a model of I want income per door, right?
Mhm.
I want income per door, but not to pay myself so I can just go buy more and keep buying.
Yeah.
So I think most people need to come to that realization if they want to get serious about building wealth is it's not an income producing asset until you're at a certain level of doors where you're like, okay, well, like I said, at 2,000 doors, I'm spitting out 400 grand a month. I could probably take some of that money, right?
Mhm.
So I just think people need to understand what they're trying to achieve. There's 4 things that I firmly believe in any business, right? Here's a big takeaway for all of you. Decide what you want and why you're doing it. Make a decision,
Mhm.
right? Commit to that decision. Take massive action. And lastly, be extremely uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Because if you're going to go for something, it should really stretch you outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't want to say you're not living, you're not doing the best you can,
Mhm.
right? 2,000 doors is going to push me extremely outside of my comfort zone. Point being is I've never built a 2,000 door portfolio.
Right.
So I can't say, oh, this is going to be easy. No, it won't be, right? Like this is totally new to me, right? And then here's your fifth. This one I really want everyone to pay attention to. I really want you to write this down if you're somewhere with a pen. Stop your time expectation. Stop your time expectation. Everybody, and listen, I coach hundreds and hundreds of people every single month, tens of thousands over the years. Everyone has this demented, I want my first deal in 30 days. I want 2,000 doors in the next 5 years. I want the wants, get rid of them. Stop your time part of that. I want 2,000 doors. Did anyone hear? I'm not saying I want them in 10 years. Like if it takes me 20, it's going to take me 20.
Yeah.
So be it. You
Mhm.
know why that's important? Is it doesn't get me discouraged. I learned this through reading a book. In the book, I couldn't even remember what book it is right now, but they're talking about a prisoner of war and how this prisoner of war survived years. Like I think it was like 5 or 7 years
Mhm.
of the worst of the worst. All of his other captives died except for him. And
Yeah.
then he got released, came back to America. And uh someone interviewed him about like how did you live and everyone like how did you make it through? And his whole point was because everyone else died of a broken heart. They kept expecting by summer they'll let us out, by Christmas they'll let us out, by Easter they'll let us out, and they had this time expectation, and year after year those times would pass, and everyone just gave up and died of a broken heart that they would not get out. And I knew I was going to get out. I believed it before, like he had no reason to believe. He just believed with everything he had. And here he is, the sole survivor after years of the worst of the worst. And it was because I didn't put a time on when I was getting out. And I knew if I was going to get out, I could survive anything. And it just really hit with me.
Mhm.
And I think everyone needs to do that in business. Everyone wants to make $1 million today. Everyone wants to do, you name the goal, whatever they're going to say their goal is, they want it now.
Yeah.
And it's nonsense. I've done this business for 15 years, real estate investing specifically. Like, man, if I could tell you how many people have come and gone in my 15 years because they just had this crazy expectation and they couldn't, withstand, I guess, the torture of not hitting it fast
Right.
enough, that they're just out of the business. And here I
Mhm.
am.
I like that. I like that a lot. There's a famous quote, and I'm not sure who takes the credit for that, but it goes within the lines of never let a calendar or a clock make a decision for you. At the end of the day,
Mm,
it's similar to what you're talking about, establishing the goal, but not putting yourself in that confinement of if I don't reach that particular milestone or objective by a certain time or certain date, it's definitely going to impact you as just a human being in general that you failed, you didn't achieve that. And the other point you've made was kind of definitely was struck a chord with me from being uncomfortable. I was recently going into a meeting, very huge meeting, big opportunity for me, but I was so uncomfortable. And I was telling my wife right before that, I'm like, it's fucking scary, but I love that I'm so uncomfortable because to me,
yeah.
that means I'm growing. To me, that's I'm leveling up. And from that point on, I'm like, I gotta put myself in more situations like this where I'm more uncomfortable, where I'm more scared and nervous. Then
Yep.
it means I'm growing. If I'm just doing this comfortable, all the stuff is day in and day out, then I just get stale. I just, there's an expiration date on me. So that definitely makes a lot of sense what you're talking about. And definitely thanks for sharing that. Lots of great insights you've shared with us from a just overall wisdom standpoint. In conclusion, I always like asking every guest on the podcast is what advice or a series of advice you would give your the 20-year-old self or 18-year-old self who's just starting out in that particular industry, and knowing what you know now, just talking to yourself from that perspective, what would be some of the things that you would share with yourself?
My 20-year-old self, that's a very good question. I think kind of some of what I just said about time, right? You have at 20 years old, you don't realize how much time you have, right?
Mhm.
Like you kind of think like, oh, I should be grown up already, or I should be already having these certain achievements or whatever. Even when you graduate high school or I'm sorry, college, that's a better analogy, right? When you graduate college, people think you have to have life figured out. You need to know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to, I have a very prestigious UCLA degree. I've never used the damn thing, right? The reality is,
Yeah.
kind of in the model of what Gary Vee preaches. It's like, God, you have a long life. Like, don't be in a rush to figure it out and get a job and be an adult. Like, it is that whole thing. It's like, just go have fun, go live a life, right? And some of this is just comes from this, like, we're here to enjoy our life. And people get too much in a rush to go make money, or too much in a rush to go be successful, or too much in a rush to get married, or too much in a rush, and it all happens, right? Like, I'm a late bloomer. I got married at 39. I turned 42 in 3 months, right? And so
Mhm.
2 months, 3 months. So it's like, I just had my first kid. Perfect timing. It all worked out. Perfect timing. Because if I was 25, for all those that are parents here, I would have lost my mind being a parent at 25. I wasn't mature enough. I didn't
Right.
have it together enough, right? My wife just had this great opportunity this weekend on a bachelorette party, and I took care of my kid. And I'm like, at 25, that would have been the most challenging weekend ever.
Right.
At 41, it's like, it's fun. It's challenging. Don't get me wrong. Kids are still kids, but like, it's different. And so I think the biggest piece of advice would go enjoy, don't be in a rush. Um, I'd probably tell myself not to have quite as much fun as I had in my 30s. I had a lot of fun in my 30s.
Right.
But to get a little bit more focused when the time's right. But I think the key is stop the time expectation, go enjoy. Um, that's probably it. I
Yeah.
again I want to, it's a really good deep question, so I don't have a whole lot of time to
Of course.
react to it. But I think it really is, you know, don't put expectations on yourself. Go live an incredible life while you're here. And if that means make a lot of money, awesome. But if it also means go be a vagabond and travel the country and sleep on couches, then that's awesome too.
Yeah.
Right? There's no wrong or right in this life. So build the life that you want.
That's awesome. That's all. That's great. That's a loaded question. I definitely realize that, but we get the message. I think that's very important. And I try to remind myself of that on daily basis, that just enjoying
Yeah.
the process, not so much the end objective. I think that's so hard to do, but once you get to that, it really changes the narrative, changes the mindset. So I definitely appreciate that, your ability to communicate that clearly, so quick on the spot. And just overall, Justin, it was a great conversation, very short and insightful. I personally learned quite a bit. Like I was telling you in the, at the beginning, is reason I do these podcasts is just, I learned so much from these conversations, and hopefully that, translates to others who are listening. What I love doing with all the podcast guests is do a follow-up recording in about a year, where we actually revisit the conversation from a year ago and see if everything we've discussed still makes sense, still applies. I'm glad we've got connected, especially we're both here in South Florida. So I'm definitely going to stay connected, whether you want it or not, and try to
Yeah.
collaborate. And there's so much more that we can do together. So definitely appreciate your time today.
Dude, thank you for having me. It was a great time here, bro.